Hey guys, Ron here. Tonight I'm doing another discussion only video. I'm at the harbor at Fisherman's Village, so we're going to see some boats and maybe some sea lions, some seals, harbor seals that are here, and hopefully not too much of just me talking. If you've seen some of my other videos, I really have a affinity with the whole story of Elvis. And not so much Elvis the entertainer. Like I was telling somebody tonight, I said to her, I've only seen one Elvis movie, just Jailhouse Rock. I'm really not interested in the fake Elvis. I'm interested in Elvis like I'm interested in Marilyn Monroe. People who had everything but had psychological issues and ended up basically losing everything and destroying what they had because of the hardships, the things that they went in through their lives. And in Elvis's case was never properly discussed by him. You know, in other words, there was no going to therapy or telling his deepest, darkest secrets and fears to people or any of that. He just internalized it all. And in his case, his self-medication, as we know, and the way he dealt with the pressures in his life was prescription medications, which he abused and ultimately killed him. Anyway, in saying that, I've done some Elvis videos, and tonight I want to talk about Elvis and the relationship between he and his parents. Just now, I just finished a great hour or so documentary with the guys that I listened to about Elvis, and these are a few members of the original core group of the Memphis Mafia, the so-called Memphis Mafia. That would be Marty Lacker and Charlie Hodge, Red and Sonny West, and the one who's still alive and has his own YouTube channel, the wonderful Billy Smith, who's Elvis's cousin, who was with him like 24 hours a day that last 6 months, a year of his life, just about 24 hours a day. And his wife, Jo, Billy's wife, Jo, got sucked into that vortex, and they had to deal with that awful Ginger Alden, Elvis's last girlfriend. Anyway, red eye, because the guys were all crying at the end. This was taped in 1997. They did a book too. So primarily, that's my source of information on Elvis. I don't care about people who are on the periphery or whatever the case may be, or people who hurt him like Priscilla in the end. Sorry, but she did. She leaving him for Mike Stone after all those years together was the final straw in the coffin of his life that he never recovered. Those last 5 years were terrible. And the guys were just discussing in the video they're discussing, you know, the whole gamut, but about the last half, they really concentrated on those last 5 or 6 terrible years with Elvis. And they were all crying, and I started getting a little teary-eyed and emotional, so my eye is burning because I had some suntan lotion in there earlier. Okay, let's talk about the parents. You know, it was almost faded weird stuff with Elvis from the beginning because he had a twin named Jesse Guerin, and Elvis was named Elvis Aaron, partly so he would remember Jesse Guerin, and he did all the time. And Elvis's mother and the rest of the Love Smith family that was Elvis's family, or that was Gladys's family, there's even Jewish blood on Gladys's side. They had some kind of, I don't even know the word, mystical leanings to them, religious, but also spiritual, but also through the years and through the decades, real Southern superstitious. Superstitious is a good word. And as we'll discuss, Elvis was very much like his mother Gladys, and vice versa, obviously. So Elvis's twin Jesse Guerin died, birth, stillborn, and Elvis always carried that around with him, and he thought, among other things, and I think Gladys thought also, that the fact that Elvis survived meant, I think he thought, and he said this, that apparently that he felt kind of like he had to make it up to his mother, to Gladys, that she had lost one of her babies. and that Elvis, being the survivor, had some sort of survivor guilt, and he felt that, among other things, he had to make it up to Gladys and be, the best son possible. And I think he also felt a sense of fate because he survived, as happens with people sometimes. Why did he survive? And the questions as Elvis got older, which he couldn't discuss really much with the guys I just mentioned, but he did discuss with Larry Gellar, who the guys weren't fond of. But this was a hairdresser to the stars who became Elvis's sort of spiritual guide for several years in the 60s. And he used to say to Larry Gellar, why? He was just confounded. Why did all this happen to me? I mean, he had a huge ego with the guys. I mean, Elvis was a huge ego, but privately to Gellar, why did all this happen to me? Why did Jesse die? Why did I survive? Why am I so famous? Why am I so blessed? And why does everyone in the world know me? Why did this happen? And he'd sometimes, confess, and why do I have so many problems? Why am I so unhappy so much of the time? Anyway, as he got older, that is. So when talking about Elvis and his parents, I mean, it was an interesting combination, people like to speculate because all they hear is that Elvis was so close with Gladys that they were just, sort of could have been inseparable. It's not exactly true. They weren't. One thing is certain, it was a 1-2 punch for Elvis. Everything was going great. I mean, great. At least Elvis was achieving this career for 2 years beyond anything he could ever have dreamed of. And then when he was 22, he was drafted into the Army, and he was absolutely devastated for a number of reasons. He absolutely did not want to go into the Army, and Colonel made him go into the Army and not take special services. Special services? I don't remember what it's called. Special services. He didn't let him be an entertainer in the Army. He said you have to be one of the guys, and Elvis did a lot of, it was hard. Guard duty in the freezing cold and KP and all the things. I mean, we weren't at war, but in Texas and then later in Germany, which Gladys never saw. But my point is that the 1-2 punch for Elvis was going into the Army. He thought things were just starting out for him, and he thought he'd come back and maybe have no career. Maybe those 2 years, and he just couldn't stand it. It just ate him alive. And as the guy said, the Army made him mean. He came back a different man. And he came back using pills because he was using uppers to stay awake during guard so he wouldn't fall asleep and get frostbite. And the 2 of the 2 punch was that his mother died before he went to Germany when he was still in Texas. And Elvis clearly never recovered from his mother's death. He also had some guilt over it because she was so worried about him. But let's start at the beginning. Elvis and his mother, she was very close to him during his junior high school years. She saw him as, the mostly loner little boy, and it was not overnight for Elvis. Elvis was not a popular, outgoing guy. He also wasn't a dancer, by the way. People think he must have been a dancer. He always said, if you get him out, you would never get Elvis out on the dance floor as just dancing. He just moved the way he moved. And when he started, obviously in high school, it started to come out, and his playing guitar was kind of an escape and a way to get attention. And when he recorded That's All Right, Mama, ostensibly for his mother, and it got played on the radio, that's when everything really started. But as close as Elvis and Gladys were, they could fight. And boy, did Gladys have a temper. Boy, does she have a temper. And the guys would tell stories of the dynamic between the three of them. Elvis and Gladys would fight like crazy, but also then they'd make up. And Gladys and Vernon would really go at it. Gladys and this was especially as Elvis was getting famous, for those 2 years that she saw his fame, basically, maybe 3 years, 55 to 58 when she died, she'd call him Vernon when they fought all kinds of names, meaning basically, um, she I'm sorry, I'm searching for words here, but she would sort of verbally castrate him, really didn't have much respect for him, and kind of like a kept man, even though he certainly wasn't a kept man. It's not the word I'm looking for, but really belittled Vernon a lot, and they had a lot of issues, and Vernon would take it for a while, but when he'd be away from Elvis, there were times, according to the guys, that Vernon would beat on his mother. Beat her up pretty good. She'd throw things. She'd throw plates and things. And let's hold on. They'd get in some. Always think I'm going to be alone here, and never am. But she'd throw plates and stuff, and he'd throw plates, and not plates, but definitely she would throw food and sometimes plates, and they'd go at it. And the guy said that one of the reasons that when Elvis started going out on the road before he went into the army was that he'd call, because the thought was that his mother, needed him to check in all the time. But a big part of it is he was checking in to make sure Vernon wasn't beating the hell out of Gladys, according to the guys. So it was, a complex relationship. When Elvis started to get famous, Gladys was always worried, just like phobically, unnecessarily worried about him. And she would worry about him traveling, and boy, would she have been worried if she had lived till the 70s when he was getting death threats in Vegas. But she was really worried about him, and this worry took a toll. She started drinking. Elvis was never a drinker, but Gladys was a drinker. Gladys started drinking. Gladys started taking pills. And the guy said, Lamar Fike said, she liked kind of getting wasted, and Elvis kind of liked getting wasted. They said he thinks they just both like being detached, taking those pills and being detached from reality, the downers especially. And the more that Gladys worried about Elvis through 56, 57, and into 58, the more she drank, the more the pills. She was really ashamed of the way she looked, being heavy set because of the interviews she was doing. She was now sort of a celebrity through Elvis anyway, and she wanted to lose weight. She was always, diet pills and uppers, trying to lose weight, and it was a culmination of all those things till she started getting yellow with jaundice. And the guys would say, or at least one of the guys said, she's yellow. Something's really wrong with her. And she didn't want to go to the doctor, and they finally got her to the doctor. And she was already having, I think she was almost in liver failure at that point. And it was one of those things where it was really, really bad. And like I said, the relationship between she and Vernon was never great. And Elvis was already in the Army. In fact, when she really got sick and she was hospitalized, and Vernon said, you got to come and see her. Elvis's commanding officer didn't want to let him go. And Elvis said, screw it, I'm going AWOL if I have to. And he went into, I believe it was a colonel's office, and said, if you don't let me, I'm going no matter what. He says, if you don't let me go, and I go anyway, he says, I'll go to the press and hold a press conference how you wouldn't let me go. And how's that going to look for you and for the Army? And boy, that colonel changed his tune real quick and gave him a pass. And it's reported that Elvis had seen Gladys that night, and Gladys's health was deteriorating, but she didn't want him to worry. And she said, go on, don't stay in this hospital all night. He said he wanted to go to a movie. got home late that night, I think it was, and he just shot up in bed. And somebody was with him. I don't recall which of the guys was with him, but one of the guys was with him, and he says something's wrong. And he just apparently intuitively knew. And I guess there was a phone call then from Vernon, who couldn't speak. He was crying too much. He put the nurse on. The nurse said, "You've got to come now." And they raced up there and apparently didn't even take the car put the car in park. They kind of left the engine running, ran up to the hospital, and I think the car rolled into something. But when Elvis got up to see his mother, Vernon met him in the hallway and was wailing and told Elvis that she was gone. And I think it was Lamar, but I'm not sure. One of the guys who were with him said it was like a wailing, like wounded animals. They had never heard crying and this particular high-pitched wailing from both Vernon and Elvis. They said it was one of the most, if not the most disturbing things they'd ever seen. Remember, these are very young guys. And actually, Red West had just lost his mother. Or father. Oh gosh, I apologize. I think it was his mother, but I may be wrong. And you know, there were stories about Elvis not wanting to let the casket down. Well, apparently he did hold on to the casket and talk to the casket, but they say that the things about holding the casket up were exaggerated. But anyway, it was really devastating to Elvis, and then he's left with just Vernon, and for the next 20 years, and their relationship was never that great because Vernon went on to meet a woman in Germany named Dee Stanley, who he married, and he had 2 stepsons, 3 actually. Well, I think it was Ricky, David, and one more Stanley brother, I believe. But I know Ricky and David definitely worked for Elvis in the last couple of years, and they are much derided by the core members of the Memphis Mafia because they thought that those guys were kind of relegated to just being kind of drug pushers at that time and into drugs themselves. So they don't really associate with the Stanley brothers. And then in the end, Vernon was messing around on Dee just too much, and he actually went off with a woman named Sandy Miller, who was his nurse in the 70s after his first heart attack. And as the years went by, Vernon Presley was so upset about various things, the way that Elvis would give cars away, give money away, give fur coats away, give jewelry away. Vernon wanted to hang on to every buck, you know, and he saw all the money coming in, money going out, money coming in, money going out, and later would say, you know, you did this. In other words, when he had I think his second heart attack, or his first heart attack, literally said, "You did this," and gave me the heart attack. And I believe it might have been the same meeting, and this was the late 70s when things were really bad for Elvis with the drugs and everything. Vernon apparently also said, "You worried your mother into the grave," and that really was a really cruel thing to say, and Elvis was very, very taken aback and very hurt by that. But there was clear love between the 2 parents and the child, but a lot of volatility. And I think for sure if it would have been reversed, if Gladys would have lived, it would have been a different life for Elvis, because Elvis would not have ever wanted to embarrass his mother or hurt his mother in any way. So I believe his behavior, and the guys say as well, his behavior would have been different. I'm not saying he would have walked around as a saintly virgin for the next 20 years, but I think he didn't care what his father thought, but he cared what his mother thought. And he was left with just Vernon. Like I said, they had a very complicated relationship, even though they loved each other very dearly. They had a complicated relationship to a time in the late 70s, again, the bad years, where Elvis, or mid-70s, when Elvis was in the kid. And apparently Elvis, would get up in the afternoon, and he didn't want to be bothered. But I can understand, I'm like this too. He didn't want heavy news when he just woke up. It took him a long time to get going, and he had to process, have his coffee or whatever his thing was. And one time Vernon started in on him, and talking about money again. And finally, Elvis just started throwing food and said, you know, goddamn, I'm the man of this house. I'm the boss. I'm your boss. If you don't like it, you can get the hell out. I run my own, this organization, which is me, so on and so forth. And Elvis said, you're not the half, you'll never be the man I am. And Elvis said, you'll never be half the man I am. And they had this terrible, you know, one would run off, and they did go off and then make up later. And there was times when Vernon would come downstairs in the 70s and he'd say, Elvis just fired me. And of course, none of these lasted, but it was part of, it was part of this volatile relationship that they had. All three of them had really bad tempers, particularly Elvis and his mother Gladys. But how different Elvis's life would have been if Gladys had lived. But she died young. I think she was the same age. I think she was 42, just like Elvis was. And the weight was a factor. Her drinking was a factor. Her pill popping, according to the guys, particularly the weight loss pills and everything else, was a factor. You know, here she was trying to herd chickens in the backyard at Graceland. Meanwhile, that's all she knew. She wasn't, you know, the Hollywood sophisticated, what she wanted to be, and it caused her a lot of stress and a lot of duress. And Elvis felt very, very guilty, although, of course, none of it was his fault. He loved her dearly. I guess the main point is I want to make in this video is that Elvis and Gladys, his mother in particular, were not so madly in love all the time that they never fought. Oh, they would fight, cats and dogs, both terrible tempers, but they'd come back to each other in the end always. Anyway, that's my video on Elvis and his complicated relationship with his parents. And yeah, I'm gonna do, one of these days I'll have to split it up because I want to do a video on the 3 strikes of Elvis and how I think they affected his life. Strikes meaning the things that changed Elvis from possibly could have been a guy who was as big as he was but could have had a stable life, to the things that really destroyed him emotionally. 3 strikes. And it finally got him in his early 40s, and that was, the first one was going into the Army, and he never really got over that. The second one was the biggest one, was his mother dying, and then the third one was Priscilla leaving him and what that did for his ego, not to mention the fact that he loved Priscilla, and that he never got over that loss. Those 2 losses plus the Army, that was it. And I'll discuss that, I think, at length, but it'll have to be a couple videos. Anyway, folks, from Fisherman's Village, this is Ron. If you like the channel, please do subscribe. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button, and then you'll be notified when I post. And please give the channel likes, folks. I don't have to ask you to give comments because I always get some, most of them are really good. Some are ridiculous, but that's a very small portion. I don't claim to be an expert on anything else. This is one man's opinion, but I do research my topics. I've researched Elvis for decades, so I think I know a little bit about him. Okay, guys, I will see you at the next location. Thanks again. Bye.